Hey guys, Chris here, and I'm Ukrainian Canadian. Today is December 3rd, 2023. And let's get to the news happening in Ukraine, shall we? This is going to be a very quick video, and I'm just going to do a couple updates. And evidently, the first one is in Avdiivka. And unfortunately, there are no real good news in Avdiivka. The Russians continue on pushing. In the north of Avdiivka, you can see that the Russians have taken new positions close to the village of Stepove. So in the south of Stepove, the Russians have moved in and taken some fields, and they've also moved in closer and closer to the village. As you can see, they're pretty much at the edge of Stepove at this point. And there's also a very unfortunate and terrible video that emerged yesterday of Ukrainian drone filming the execution of 2 Ukrainian prisoners of war. So the Russians brutally murdered in true Russian orc style 2 Ukrainian soldiers that surrendered because they ran out of bullets. And evidently, it's not surprising, but the Russians murdered them. And just this makes me think of all the other stories, all the other events that we don't know about, of Russians brutally murdering, whether it be Ukrainian prisoners of war or Ukrainian civilians. This is nothing new for us, but again, it's always hurtful to see these types of videos because it showcases that there's no humanity within the Russian army. They didn't come here to liberate Ukraine or help the Ukrainians. They came here exclusively to kill and plunder. And so I'll definitely take some time to honor and think about the men and women that laid down their lives in Ukraine for freedom and democracy. And I hope that you guys can also take some time to think about them today. Apart from that, in Avdiivka, there is really nothing else to report on. In the south of Avdiivka, the only Russian gain that I can report on is around the area of Opitne. You can see that they have moved slightly closer to Opitne in the north, but it's nothing really significant. So that's the only update for Avdiivka. Additionally, in Marinka, which is south of Donetsk, you can see that this is the 2014 line or pre-2022 line. The Russians have pushed a little bit further at the edge of Marinka, so now they control about 95% of the city. It was about 90%, but now it's 95%. Again, Marinka doesn't exist anymore. As a city, it's pure rubble and dust, but I still need to report on the Russian moves, advancements, or withdrawals. So here you can see how the Russians have pushed closer and closer, close to the edge of Marinka, unfortunately. So they control about 95% of the city. And that's about the only updates I have to give today. One thing I want to mention is that evidently, as we have noticed in the last few weeks, there has been a shift of momentum. It was in the Ukrainian hands since the summer and early fall, and now it has shifted back to the Russian side. And you can see that the Russians are doing multiple offensives right now in Avdiivka, close to the area of Donetsk, in Bakhmut, in the area of Kremina, and also in Kupiansk. So they have about 4 large offensives that they're currently conducting. And this comes in line with the new report today that says that the Russians have added 170,000 additional troops in the last few weeks, few months in Ukraine, bringing them close to the number of 450,000 men. And remember that the Russians in February 2022 started with 270,000 men. So they almost doubled the amount of men that they have in Ukraine. So of course, the Russians have more capabilities in doing offensives. And another thing I want to mention is that with the amount of offensives that the Russians are conducting, they also are seeing some of the bloodiest months now. So the month of November was one of the bloodiest for the Russians. They've lost 28,000 men in November alone, according to Ukrainian numbers. And so even if it was half of that, it's still horrific numbers for the Russians. And most of it can be credited to the Avdiivka meat grinder. And you guys know, you've seen the videos every single day. The Russians are doing storming positions, they're pushing, but they're also losing a lot of men as a result of that. And this brings me to this new Russian innovation, if you may call it that, the Ruski Kukun. But all jokes aside, this is an interesting development that the Russians have worked on. And so the Ukrainians have spotted these Russian cocoons. And so essentially these are welded metal sheets on top of frames, so metal frames, So they have metal sheets, Kevlar lining, and other protections. And then on top of it, they put camouflage nets and vegetation to reduce visual visibility when they're observing the terrain. And so obviously the Ukrainians can spot them with their drones because they're so natural looking. And they have a very characteristic shape, a very specific shape that is hard to not notice. But they can still protect the Russian soldiers who are moving these cocoons across open fields from small projectiles such as 30 millimeter grenades or 40 millimeter grenades. So you can see that the Russians, despite the heavy losses that they're seeing, they're now trying to find new innovative ways, if we may call them, to protect themselves. And it showcases again that the Russians, there's no indication that they will be stopping. If anything, it shows how determined they are at continuously push through these open fields and cross them and take up positions. So unfortunately, this is another sort of thing that the Ukrainians now need to fight against. And so this brings me back to the map. And the last thing I want to talk about is obviously I've talked about the momentum that the Russians have picked up on. This is, there's no point in hiding that. It's a fact. And, also this comes in line as well with the fact that the West now, we've been hearing more and more last few weeks, the stalemate, the narratives of fatigue, and that, more and more that Ukraine should be discussing peace with Russia. And what really bothers me, especially this fatigue, right? These words coming out of the mouths of politicians in the West, or even the media saying that there is a fatigue, there is a stalemate, is like, we've turned this conflict into our personal feelings. We let our own personal feelings dictate the course of this war. And I can definitely testify and see that with the amount of help that Ukraine, or lack of help, Ukraine has been receiving in the last few months, right? Yeah, evidently, Ukraine still is receiving ammunition, help from Germany. I've been reporting on that, the United States, but it's much less compared to what was pledged and what was being given even a year back, right? And I think that the West needs to have a clear vision, a clear defined objective as to how they can defeat together Russia, because there is still no clear definition of how they can defeat Russia. And, again, I think the West and Ukrainian partners know exactly what Ukraine needs to be able to defeat Russia. And I think that if that clear vision was there, let's say in the spring, summer of this year, and Ukraine had received long-range missiles, there was already training of the F-16 pilots being done in 2022 and early 2023. And every other weapon that Ukraine has been asking for had been already sent to Ukraine, we would not be seeing, this small breakthrough from Ukraine in Orikhiv. I think the breakthrough would have been much bigger back in the summer and early fall of this year. But again, because there's no clear defined vision, there's no clear alignment as to how, the West needs to do to help Ukraine. This is what we're seeing now, is this uncoordinated help. And once in the blue moon, Ukraine can receive the new batch of weapons, but it's never guaranteed, right? Tomorrow, whether it be Germany, France, United States, United Kingdom can say, we don't want to help you guys anymore. You guys have to sue for peace. So I think that's very unfortunate that, these words of stalemate and fatigue are happening more and more. And we don't have the right to say that. It's the Ukrainians are doing all of the fighting right now. The Ukrainians are sacrificing their own lives every single day. The West doesn't get to say we're tired because you're not doing the fighting for Ukraine. You're just providing assistance that is crucial, yes, but Ukraine is doing all of the fighting. And it's worrisome to hear more and more of these articles and these words being brought to the media, which obviously is going to impact the attitude of the public on this war, right? They're saying, this war's been ongoing for years, almost 2 years now. Ukraine needs to sue for peace, without understanding the global implications of allowing Russia to win. And for Russia to win, it wouldn't mean to grab now Ukraine entirely, but it would be to force Ukraine into frozen conflict, force them back into a Minsk III agreement, which would allow Russia to rearm itself, and in a few years do the exact same thing. And everybody's going to have a surprised face like, oh, we didn't expect that. Come on, we know better than this. We know better that Russia is a terrorist regime. Putin regime is they're terrorists, and you cannot negotiate with them anymore. They have lied time over time over time again. And so all that to say that the West needs to be aligned. They need to provide as many weapons as necessary. They have the capacity to do that. And let's send those long-range missiles, those Taurus, those ATACMS that can reach 300, 250 kilometers. Ukraine needs all of that. And they need to multiply these types of attacks like we've seen in Berdyansk a few weeks ago on the airfield, and even in Russia, to be able to really crush the Russian war effort. So let's not let our feelings dictate the course of the war. The Ukrainians will decide when and how they'll stop this conflict. So that's the video for today, guys. Let me know what you think about my comments. I hope you enjoy my updates. Again, if you enjoy my video, please like it, subscribe to my channel, and leave me comments. And I will see you guys in the next one. Thank you, and Slava Ukraini!